Bună seara și bine v-am găsit la o nouă ediție de Talks by Softminator. Ediția cu numărul 146 o să fie o ediție un pic mai atipică, cum deja poate vedeți, pentru că am ales să lăsăm lumea să facă join în Google Meet-ul nostru. Motivul principal ar fi să lăsăm lumea să pună întrebările live și mai apoi, după ce se termină prezentarea speakerului nostru, să rămânem la un pahar de vorbă cu toții și să mai vorbim. Având în vedere că o să fac stream la propriul meu ecran, după cum se poate vedea deja, o să mai apară pop-up-uri destul de des, dar oricum o să vă rog să rămâneți cu toții pe mute și în caz că vreți să puneți o întrebare, să apăsați pe butonul acela din dreapta jos de Raise Hands. Acum, revenind, în această seară o să avem un singur speaker. Este vorba de Irina Ioana Brudaru, Business Intelligence and Data Analytics Manager la Creative Clicks, mentor și coach, ex-Google, Master of Science la Max Planck Institute of Informatics. Irina, o să te las pe tine să faci un scurt intro, să le povestești oamenilor despre background-ul tău. Ok, asta a fost un sunet foarte ciudat de la Dien. Spuneam, Irina, o să te las pe tine să faci un mic scurt intro, să le povestești un pic oamenilor de trecutul tău, mai ales că ai un CV de invidiat, și să ne spui, bineînțeles, și despre ce vei vorbi astăzi. Și o să-ți dau prin să te fac un pic mai mare.
Oh, God. Ok.
Gata.
Bună, sunt Irina Ioana Brudaru. Vin din Iași, ambii părinți m-au fost super nerzi. Fratele meu e în același domeniu, deci nerd family. 38 de ani și în mod curent acum locuiesc în Amsterdam, încă 2 săptămâni pentru că mă mut la Berlin. Long story short, am studiat informatica deja la 12 ani, programare în Basic, în Pascal. Jesus, that was nice at that time. În liceu, după aceea la Info Iași, și prin Erasmus și burse de studiu am ajuns în Germania, unde am stat 10 ani de zile. Acolo în Germania am studiat la Max Planck, care e foarte mișto. Este You Suffer from Imposter Syndrome, toată lumea este super deșteaptă, toată lumea are burse de toate felurile și se face cercetare. Se face cercetare așa puțin ca în stil Google. Și paranteze. Pentru cine caută burse de master, de summer, de research, Max Planck, go for it. Really. Așa. După aceea am lucrat aproape 4 ani în Berlin, în diferite startup-uri, diferite business models, orice de la consultanță, jack of all trades, programare în Ruby, whatever you want, Java. Dar cel mai mult mi-a plăcut lucru cu datele și având teza de master pe data structures, very large data structures și special algorithms, am zis ok, mă duc în direcția asta, I really like it. Și mi-am dat seama că îmi place și mai mult, că mă pasionează user behavior. Și asta e partea cea mai mișto. Pentru că în momentul în care am lucrat la o firmă de gaming, Vuga se cheamă, încă există în Berlin, am dat seama că poți să prezici atât de multe chestii în funcție de primele 5 minute într-un joc. Și mie chestia asta mi s-a părut fascinantă, să știi cât cheltuiești, cât îți aduce userul, ce fel de acțiuni îți cresc angajamentul, engagementul și așa mai departe. De acolo m-am mutat la Google, m-au recrutat ei, i-am întrebat, why do you want me? I'm not a standard person, eu mi-am schimbat joburile după cum vreau eu, în sensul că dacă nu mai am de învățat, mă duc în altă parte. Dacă s-a terminat și nu există proiecte care să fie mai interesante, ok, mă duc în altă parte, fac freelancing, I don't care. Iar Google-ul zice, no, we actually like people that can think for themselves. Iar la Google am fost și pe buy side și pe sell side, pe linia tehnică, lucrat cu clienți de tot felul din Germania, state și Olanda. Și pot să vă spun pentru că am lucrat în toate cele 3 birouri. Am locuit 3 ani în San Francisco, cred că cea mai mișto experiență la Google. Iar în ultimii 3 ani lucrez în Amsterdam, management și consulting pe BI, cloud, big data, statistics, tot ce vrei. Și trebuia să dau acest talk, mi-am promis lui Dorin încă din vară, dar n-a fost să fie și uite acum.
Mai bine mai târziu decât niciodată.
Nu, așa zic eu. Și bine că ai insistat, că dacă nu insista, I would not have revived it. Vă rog să puneți orice întrebări doriți. Nu mă supăr dacă mă întrerupeți. Ce am spus plural. Mie puteți să mă adresați cu you, tu, ok? Pe pada pe degrees. Și dacă nu există în momentul de față, I would suggest that, ca să mergem la prezentare.
Am scos eu pe cineva din acest meet.
E Peppa the Pig, I mean, you know, very famous. Hai să facem prezentarea. Așa puțin. De ce discut, de exemplu, despre Big Data în principiu? Pentru că asta cred că a fost pâinea și untul meu în fiecare zi, în ultimii 10 ani. Și, de exemplu, când lucram la Google, ne ocupam de orice era front-end, de ce era implementare de reclame pe front-end, de spam reports on the back-end. Și văzând tot felul de modeluri de business și din punctul de vedere al startup-ului când am lucrat în Berlin și din punctul de vedere al unui account manager când lucrează cu Amazon sau cu ISP-urile germane sau în perioada aceea de ancillary copyright, acum câți 4, 5 ani, 6 ani, 7 ani, nu mai știu, în Germania. Îți dă o altă perspectivă și totul, fiecare companie devine un data point for me. It's like, okay, let's make some statistics on it. Și astăzi o să prezint foarte pe scurt, dar vă rog să mă întrebați, să puneți întrebări. O să discut un pic despre data lifecycle management, cum vă se supără cineva dacă dau pe engleză la niște chestii, pentru că mi este tare greu. Așa.
Nu, sigur nu.
Așa, pentru că sunt plecată de, nu știu, 16-17 ani, unele cuvinte nu mi le mai găsesc. Și, well, we'll discuss about the data lifecycle management because, well, data is the bread and butter of any business today. And a company that doesn't have their data in order does not make as much money as they should. And when I'm going to give these examples and go through different data lifecycle stages, I will also try my best to give some examples from my own experience with it. Hello. So first, what do we do with data? We collect it. So regarding collection, of course, we can talk about, well, do you have an app? Is it desktop? Oh, okay.
Hello.
Ok. Asta nu merge foarte bine.
Cred că trebuie pus din nou, cum se cheamă?
Ok. Hai, îți trimit eu un link acum. Îți trimit imediat un link nou și dacă poți să intri pe el de pe Google Meet.
Not a problem.
Awesome. Ți-l trimit imediat.
Și pentru că mă pui pe live stream sau o chestie?
Da, noi suntem deja pe live stream. O să ne mutăm acolo.
M-a primit. Ok, vă zic la revedere și ne vedem în celălalt, nu?
Yep, eu sunt deja acolo.
Ok.
Hello?
Hello.
Bun. Less distractions. O să rog restul lumii care ne urmărește pe Facebook și pe YouTube, pentru că într-adevăr n-a fost o idee foarte bună. Poate o să revenim la meet-ul acela la sfârșitul live-ului. Dacă aveți întrebări, puneți-le în comments și eu o să le pun mai departe speakerului nostru. Irina, sorry de...
I'm unfazed. It's all good. Așa, mai departe, scrie în carte. Prezent. First stage of data lifecycle management, it's about collection. So whenever you collect data for any kind of application or business model or website, whatever it is that you are collecting data for, you have to think, well, what am I tracking? How often do I need it? Do I need this as in a daily file of statistics, or do I need this as a stream? For example, if you look at Google Analytics works with streams, obviously, because you see all the activities from 5 minutes ago. But let's say that if you work with Tarom or KLM, you do not have that kind of need for minute type of events. So you have to decide what is stream versus messaging. Is it a multi-device? Is it app and desktop? Is it something else? Do you need to use different tracking methodologies for those? So for example, if you have an app, my recommendation as a Google fangirl would be go use Firebase. If you use desktop, Google Analytics, maybe not, maybe something else. But as a parenthesis, whenever you track, those numbers will never look the same on different sides of the business. So to give an example, you can have a request in the front end, but there may be so many issues. For example, ad blockers, scripts, cross-browser scripting that doesn't work. Maybe not compatible with Safari, please. Or yeah, there are a lot of things that can go wrong, so that the numbers that you're looking at can look differently from, let's say, the client's perspective and the company's perspective or the agency's perspective. To give an example, we were doing about programmatically thousands of A/B tests with Amazon for a very custom ad implementation. And we couldn't see the same numbers. They would see something because they had their internal tracking systems, and we would see something because we had our own, and those pixels does not equal love. So we always looked at different numbers. Now, of course, those differences can be explained through many things, but this is something that one has to live with it. So I worked in companies that, for example, would have both Adobe Analytics and Google Analytics, and they would see different numbers. It's normal. So how are you tracking? What are you tracking? What is the granularity? And what kind of tools do you use? You can decide in the beginning, or you can decide on the path to their collection. So let's say you collect, but you also have to store them, which in that case, we have to go next. Where do you store it? And there are different reasonings on why you should store it in cloud, or maybe on-prem, or maybe multi-cloud as well. It can depend on different business models or policies or political opinions. So, for example, there are companies that say, well, I do not want to use Google Cloud because, yes, I understand it's very light and very easy, but our business model is something that, let's say, might compete with part of Google's business model, and that is why we wouldn't like to be, using their cloud systems. So they go to Azure, or maybe they go to AWS. Or maybe it's actually cheaper to be on-prem. I mean, these are things that you need to think of and look at, like, is this scalable if I go on cloud? Am I collecting data that will get really a lot really quick, or is it something small? So this is kind of how you decide whether you go cloud, multi-cloud, or on-prem. In the previous company where I was working, it was music royalties companies that would calculate royalties and analytics based on information from Spotify, Pandora, and music labels. And the catalog, which means the actual art that belonging to each album, and each album information was stored on-prem, because it was something very rarely accessed in terms of like accessing one album out of a catalog of 100 years of music, and rather sparse. So for that type of data, on-prem was better. For things like analytics and different levels of aggregation of analytics, then cloud. And in terms of scalability, also, I would say from my experience that I recommend cloud, because you can scale really, really quickly when you need to. And of course, we're talking about different database types. Depending on users, are you going to have raw logs? Because initially you're going to have just raw logs in the collection phase. What does a raw log look like? So let's say that you're on desktop and you're on Amazon and you're looking at a wonderful pair of Nike shoes, and I click it, and then the database records something like the user agent, all the information on the browsers and where it came from, and what kind of operating system, what's the size, all that information about where I am, who I am, making that request of an ad or a search or whatever, is recorded in the raw logs, and potentially even more than just that information that I mentioned. Maybe like a security score, or is this spam or not? That is the most raw data that you can work with. But if you aggregate it into more usable, digestible levels, you can create information that is for business or for engineering or for business intelligence analysts. So the question is, yeah, after collecting and storing all the raw data, how are you going to use it, store it further, and in which aggregation and for which purposes? So, for example, if you think of an analytics database where maybe somebody with a non-computer science background, they would use a star schema because it's very logical and you don't really need to do more. And maybe an engineer would prefer actually a first level of aggregation, so not the raw logs, because they just know how to materialize, not materialize, aggregate, makes the query faster, quicker, and so on. Please ask me if you have any questions on this one. I think, for example, from my experience at Google in advertising, you would see raw logs, and then you would see aggregated databases on minute, hour, day, week, month, quarter, and year. And everything that was older than 2 weeks, you could no longer access through the classic logs. They would actually get archived. So you used a tool called Bigtable, which also exists in Google Cloud. So in this case, this is an example of different level of aggregations and different levels of users. And on another hand, it's also, let's say, oops, I lost my thought actually. I'm sorry. So different levels of, also recency. So what I wanted to say, don't store the data as if you're using everything, all of it today. Think of how often you access the data, and depending on that, make the decision how much you keep in an aggregated level or archive level, or more non-aggregated, let's say more detailed. And we're going to talk about data maintenance. And, if you look on the internet about the, data lifecycle management, you're going to see different categories that might map or not exactly on this one. Again, depends on how deep you want to go into this topic. If you're talking about maintenance, you're going to talk about also backups. You're going to talk about whether you have a staging or just a production database. In the current company, we have just a production database, and I cannot tell you how painful it is. Of course, there's security and privacy. I'm not DevOps, so I don't know, but this is also part of it, part of the work. Data quality and QA is so important. Again, and I've learned it the hard way, having predictive models built on a production database that doesn't have a proper QA. That means with every release you break something. There's a high likelihood of breaking something. So then the question is, is it something you can live with, or do you have neurosurgery type of data that needs to be audited for quality? So in terms of my experience at Google, I would say, yeah, that's the most high quality data that I've seen so far. And in performance marketing, in smaller companies, it's the lowest quality. What else? In curating and organizing. So depending on the business model, you also have to think how you design your tables and databases, also for users' use. So in my experience as a consultant, there is one company that I have in mind here in Netherlands. It's called Rituals. It's like showers and perfumes, who has built the first Dutch customer data platform, a CDP. That means that from a user perspective, they can see everything that the user has done, everything from visits and apps and buying presents and buying things for themselves or loyalty systems or customer support, customer services, type of, let's say, um, what do you call DHL post services and postal speed. And having that kind of view allows you to monetize the data very easily in the next steps. Other things, because we talked about, again, I'm talking in very layman terms, integration and synchronization. So when I was working at Google, many clients would say, I'm not seeing the data from 2 hours ago and I did a change on the website and I don't know if the ads are running and I can't see anything because the data is not refreshing. And then I would look in our lower level logs and say, no, but the data is there. You have to wait until it will synchronize in all the aggregated levels until it gets to you. So again, this is something that to make sure that you do it well. Integration and enrichment. This is also a topic maybe for a separate topic, but whenever you use your own data, it's called first party data, it just belongs to you. But sometimes you can enrich that data with external information. Like, let's say that you are tracking the sales of hairspray in Netherlands. And unfortunately, in Netherlands, you have high humidity and a lot of rain. So in order to forecast maybe the sales of hairspray, you would like to also include the weather report from a public database. So this would be enrichment. This would be kind of an example for it. The last two stages of DLM, I would say it's also the easiest ones to talk about. Usage. So what kind of user has what kind of access level? And of course, identity and access management. Different tools have different ways of doing that. I really love Google Cloud again, so on. So it's very easy to do that in Google Cloud. But in general, when you have multiple databases, different data and whatnot, please do not give right access to customer care in a production database. I think it makes sense why I'm saying that. You'd be surprised how many companies don't think of that. They think they're saving money by saying having just one production database on which everyone can access and change things. It just makes my skin crawl when I think of that. Again, because you don't know who changed what. And probably nobody's auditing those changes. And because there's also very sensitive information. So in cases of spam reports or really hard to troubleshoot situations at Google, we would have access to the lowest level of data, which you needed to get access, so to say. And whenever you wanted to see those logs, you had to type in a certain keyword so that they would know that this is a special type of access and that they can track it. Otherwise, you couldn't. The syntax basically forced you to leave a trace of what you were doing and why. So if they catch you that you would be looking at non-private data that's not yet hashed, or let's say you should not be seeing users' emails, addresses, or content, right? That is getting tracked all the time and audited at the end of every month or week, or maybe even that night. So again, this is very important for security of your data, leaks, an intern not writing in your, financial database and so on. And of course, we're going to cleaning. Thank God. I mean, this is when, how do you clean your data? I talked at some point about having data that's very recent, easy to access, but data from 10 years ago from advertising, maybe that is not interesting, so you archive that one. And because we talked about GDPR, Of course, with GDPR, there are also all sorts of rules on how long you're allowed to store the user's data, or what is the default, whether is there an opt-in, is there an opt-out, how long after an opt-out do you still keep the data? So all these questions have to be answered, because you shouldn't be keeping users' information that don't want it. And archiving, which is what I talked about before. And I'm going to give an example also from the Google days. So in Google, you, I think it's called different today, but it was called a double click for publishers. And you could use their advertising data to suggest optimizations to them only if they clicked a certain box when they signed up for the product that said, yes, you can use my data for optimizing my business. And if they didn't do that, you were not allowed to look, analyze, and offer them certain optimizations. Like maybe you are rejecting a certain type of category of ads that I personally don't think it makes any sense. Let's say you're selling hairspray and you're blocking ads, I don't know, on your hairspray advice page about luggage. Just random example. Yeah, so let's what happened in that case and how was it administered? It was actually a manual flag in the database that had to be updated every single night. And even though the client or the company could make millions, he couldn't touch it. So this is very important. Why is the structure that I just presented important? In a big company, obviously, as Google, compliance. Because if an intern can access the content of Gmail emails, it's not bueno at all. Efficiency. If I am a certain level or certain title, then of course I would have access to certain data. So I can have access to a subset of the entire data, and maybe automatically I have access to some, depending on the products I support, but not all, because of security, for which you have to apply for multiple types of access. If you are organized, and if you design both your tables, databases, and the way you store it, and the access levels, the value of your data increases. So I've given an example in a previous slide about this Dutch company called Rituals that has a unique customer data platform. They can market the hell out of it now. And it took a long time to build. I think 3 years ago, 4 years ago, they didn't have anything. They were barely using Google Analytics. They were not using audiences, not even querying anything. And building this platform, it allowed them to segment their users and to understand how much money people would spend and what would trigger people to spend money or not. So you can build a lot of predictive modeling, whatever the reason and whatever for, if your data is clean and legal and compliant and as complete as possible and enriched even if you want. For big companies, it's pretty clear, but for small companies, if you start being organized from the beginning, and maybe this is my German studying background speaking, it forces you to think in a structured way for what comes next and scale when time comes to scale. And yeah, maybe the most interesting part, monetizing your data. There are different types of data. When I talk about first-party data, this is the business's data. So all the users that visit your website, that use your application, your app, whatever, your product, all the information about their loyalty, or how often they visit, or how often they spend and how much they spend. Second-party data is the same type of data, but that belongs to someone else. So let's say that Ritual says, we don't have any Sephora in Netherlands. I would like to buy some Sephora information, like what do users buy in France, right? Sephora exists in France, not in Netherlands, but I would like to use that information to make some guided decisions for the Dutch market. And the third-party data is anything from everything. retargeting. So it's companies that have cookies and a wide reach of yeah, the entire internet to understand what do users do. If you know all the cookies that are in your browser. So for example, when you want to make the best out of your first party data, which is user visits, Google Analytics, users information, CRM, you what you would try to do is join your first party data with Google Analytics data and have an option to use third-party data that looks similar like yours. So what does this mean? It means that, let's say I work at Rituals and I see two types of users. Women that buy a lot of perfume, men that buy a lot of aftershave, and women that buy both. I'm trying to give an example out of my own head. I don't know if it's gonna work. I think the most valuable segment out of this is the women who buy perfume or perfume and, I don't know, aftershave. So what I would like to find out is, are there any users that have an online behavior similar to these women that we see that buy this perfume? And that means, do they read the same newspapers, use the same apps, or log into similar products? I mean, somebody who uses this website probably also will use Facebook or Instagram or something else. So it's called similar audiences, and enabling them allows you to tap into a market that doesn't buy your product yet. If I would go a little bit backward, why do we need these kind of user segments and how do we find them out? Let's say that you have a truly integrated and complete first-party data containing user visits too, and loyalties and purchases and everything. If you'd run an algorithm to understand what kind of users you have, you would understand that based on these segments that you, let's say, clustered these users into, you know that you have a bucket with users that are spending a lot. There are very few users like that. Most people might, let's say, buy one shower gel a month, but others buy way more. And then you have users that maybe buy just for Christmas, my presents, like students. They don't have much money. They buy once a quarter. So you understand and try to deduct attributes about the users that buy certain types of products. And the purpose for this, the methodology is called customer lifetime value. So knowing how much a person spends during their life as a customer to you. It's also used for enhancing audiences, like I mentioned before. The purpose of knowing your users is to move them to the next monetization segment or to best support them if they are in the uppermost segment. So for example, from my gaming experience, 1% of the users would be the only ones who spend anything at any time. And out of that 1%, only 1% spends more than $10. So yeah, very, very few. And you have to understand what makes the users move. Is it a certain nudge from a game? Is it a certain game pace? Is it a certain engagement step? Or maybe the colors? I don't know. I'm just saying. But the purpose is to move users into the upper monetization segment. When you have also these kind of segments and you have customer lifetime value, you have a customer data platform, then you can use something that's called the propensity model, so the likelihood of, and you can say, I know this person bought 2 shower gels. This person is female, and the shower gel was one female and one male. That doesn't look like it's the same user for 2 shower gels, so I'm going to assume that only one of those bottles finishes, it's time to show this person an ad. Like, hey, your shower gel must be empty. Please, are you considering a new shower gel? And I can tell you for sure that there are companies that have these things implemented, and that's how they send their emails out, and that's how they send you an alert. Or I think there is a very famous case from 10 years ago where a woman bought a pregnancy test and then she didn't tell anyone, but then she received a newsletter in paper form with a lot of baby products, which was very scary for the dad who didn't know yet, right? So that's a very good propensity model, but maybe not at the right time. Maybe they should have waited 3 more months. The other things that you could use is, propensity to leave or to churn or buy or re-engage or recommend to someone. This, of course, is done on inferring on past behavior. And what else can you do? You can forecast revenue out of it. So let's say based on past year's behavior and current acquired users, I think we're going to make this much money, or I think we're going to have this much spam. So let's reserve a certain budget for spam or fraud, and so on. Actually, in the current company, we're building a lot of models for fraud and chargeback prevention. It's a little bit of a gray area where we work with performance marketing, but data is very interesting. It's transactions data. I'm thinking, what else could I tell you about here on the monetization? When I mentioned customer lifetime value and acquisition, when I make an online campaign to acquire new users for a game, let's say, I spend a certain amount of marketing budget. And let's say I budget that for 1,000 people, but only 10 people installed the game. That means that the cost of acquisition is the entire sum over 10. And what you want is to acquire users that spend more in your game than the money that you spend to acquire them. And this is where customer lifetime value in user acquisition comes in. There are currently tools and options also, I think, in Google Ads currently to bid, to buy ads on the margin. So the cost of, or on the customer lifetime value itself, as in, please don't spend more than this. This is how much this user is worth. Don't spend more to get it. So you can do that. And yeah, I mean, there's more to talk about it here, but I think it's enough for now. And another thing that I mentioned was GDPR. I mean, this is maybe it's a bit more boring, and this is just a screenshot I found online because it's just easier. What kind of data do you store and do you use it? Should you have it? If you shouldn't have it, don't have it. Delete it. How did you accidentally, or how did you happen to own that data? Was it through consent? Was it through a contract? Or was it accidental? Where are you allowed to use this data? By law, for example, that example that I gave you about DoubleClick for publishers, only the companies that allowed you to do optimizations on their data were allowing you to use the data. So again, yeah, this is lawful processing. If, let's say, a user or a company is no longer using that product, how long is the policy to retain that data for any kind of complaints, laws, so on and so forth? Does the data expire after 5 years, or how long? Is the data anonymized? For example, I had an implementation case once where we were implementing ads on a webmail under HTTP, not HTTPS. And the way the webmail company was doing things, and I do not know why. First, they were not they hadn't transferred to HTTPS, and second, they would actually keep the username with which you logged into the webmail in the URL. And so that URL contained the information of the user ID, which is very, very bad. It's a PII, it's personal information, you shouldn't have that. But any other party, like advertising that you have on your webmail, will have access to that URL through the referrer. or through the user agent. So that means that you accidentally are storing data that you shouldn't be storing because of a bad implementation. These are examples that merit a lot of attention. I think another case was where I saw Gdpr issues, for example, credit card. Please do not store credit card information or username information in a place where too many people can access it. Make sure that's very private. And I'm sure this is straightforward to most people. And of course, automate. Everything should be automated, not manual flags. That doesn't work. Not long term, not when you have more than 50 clients on a product. And I would say, I think I've reached the end of the presentation. So please ask me any types of questions from data engineering, statistics, machine learning, monetization, GDPR. I'm open to any kind of questions, and I would
Awesome.
love to hear them now.
Awesome. Thank you, Irina, for your presentation. It was quite comprehensive, yeah, and definitely data is money. It's money. And also, similar segments are also amazing, especially if you do Google ads or Facebook ads and find the best people that pay for your product or are the highest buyers in your e-commerce, like grab them, make an audience, find similar people, target them with ads, and get more of those. We don't have any questions on our Facebook Live, but we can go back to the previous meet when where we had some trolls there. Hopefully they're gone, but the rest of the people can join us for questions. For the rest of the people that are watching live, see you in the meet or see you in 2 weeks on our next Talks by SoftBank.